Good afternoon, good evening, welcome. I'm Janice Kaminer-Resnick, and on behalf of Jews United for Democracy and Justice and Community Advocates, Inc., I welcome you to tonight's America at a Crossroads virtual town hall program. I think we're on program number 145 tonight. Thanks to our leadership team, former Congressman Mel Levine, former Supervisor Zev Yaroslavsky, David Lehrer, Caroline Kelly, Rabbi Ken Chazen, and a very special welcome and thank you to Sarah Longwell, Michael Steele, and Madeleine Brand for being with us tonight to gain their well-informed perspectives on the GOP and American conservatism. It is sure to be an enlightening program. We have an amazing lineup to share with you over the next several weeks. Next week on March 8th, we turn our attention to race, crime, and police reform, an issue on the minds of many Americans. We will be joined by Connie Rice, a renowned civil rights attorney, and by a man who knows as much about policing as anyone in America. That's Bill Bratton. He's had the unique distinction of leading the police departments of Boston, New York, and Los Angeles, and they will be in conversation with Warren Olney. The following week, on March 16th, we will hear from author and documentarian, as well as former producer of 60 Minutes, Chris Whipple. He has a just-released book called The Fight of His Life, explores the first 2 years of the Biden White House. He will be in conversation with the always wonderful Pat Morrison. The following week, on March 22nd, we will host Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times conservative columnist Bret Stephens. Bret's column this week, in which he strongly endorsed Biden's policy in support of Ukraine, will be sent in the email you will get at the conclusion of tonight's program. He will be interviewed on March 22nd by Warren Olney. Then on March 28th, a Tuesday evening, and I just want to remind you, the last program of this month will be on Tuesday night. We are excited to present Pulitzer Prize-winning author and leading expert on Ukraine and Eastern Europe, Anne Applebaum, currently a noted columnist for The Atlantic. Anne will be in conversation with Madeleine Brand, and we will be updated on what's happening in the war in Ukraine and Russia. After a Passover break in mid-April, we're excited to bring you once again former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, to offer a military expert's view of Europe's largest war since World War II. He will be interviewed by Warren Olney. On a lighter note, for those who celebrate, happy Purim. Don't eat too many hamantashen, but do have a fun and festive holiday. Of course, as always, thank you for joining us. And now my colleague, David Lehrer, will introduce tonight's guests. David?
Thank you, Janice. Once again, the programming gods are with us. When we planned this program weeks ago, we had no way of knowing that cleavages in the Republican Party would become dominant headlines by the time it aired. Sure enough, this morning, Politico headlines an article, Trump ties GOP in knots. It observes that Trump is driving a wedge through the GOP over one of American politics' thorniest issues, the future of Medicare and Social Security, cleaving Republicans at every level. We have no better experts to discuss this topic and its implication than the two who are with us tonight. Our guests are two experts on the Republican Party and the conservative movement in America. Sarah Longwell is a Republican strategist who has played a significant role in the Never Trump movement from its earliest days. She's the publisher of The Bulwark, where she works with Bill Kristol, a frequent guest on this program, and Charlie Sykes. She's also the head of Republicans for the Rule of Law, which she co-founded with Kristol. Michael Steele is a conservative commentator who serves as the first African-American elected to statewide office in Maryland, and the first African-American to head the Republican National Committee. He has also served as a regular columnist for The Root and is an omnipresent political analyst on MSNBC and now an occasional host as well. Our moderator tonight is KCRW's Madeleine Brand. Her award-winning program, Press Play, covers news and culture, as well as national, international, and local stories. She's a superb interviewer and a frequent moderator on our broadcasts. Madeleine?
Thank you, David. And thank you, Janice. It's great to be back. And I'm excited to talk with Sarah and Michael. And I haven't met you in person before, but of course, I've seen you and heard you everywhere. So it's nice to see you in person, I guess, in person. So the title of tonight's discussion is The Future of the Republican Party and Conservatism. And I just want to begin by getting a definition from both of you of what is it? What is the Republican Party in your minds? I assume you're both members still of the Republican Party, although Michael, you voted for Biden in the last election, and Sarah, you raised millions of dollars to defeat Trump. So can we begin with you, Michael? For you, what is your definition of a Republican now in 2023?
Well, it's certainly not me, that's for sure, or Sarah. But first off, let me just say it is a real pleasure to be back with you and to be back with everyone, Janice and David. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. Look, all things in politics evolve, and they evolve around demographic changes and attitudinal changes. But there are some constants. There are some constants, and those things we call foundational. And for me, it goes back foundationally to what drew me into the party as a young 17-year-old kid growing up in Washington, D.C., and how that would manifest itself over these many years very much was anchored to those foundational threads around principles of governance, how we lead the country, how we govern the country, the care we regard with respect to people's individual rights and liberties and their freedoms, including a free press, for example, even though we may have issues at times with it. Certainly our role in the world, foundational principles around keeping the homeland safe, as well as our relationships intact abroad, free market economies, family values around the idea of how you define family and how you raise your kids and how you live your life out in your community. That's the sort of libertarian nature of the GOP. That's not what you hear coming out of this party today. And it is much more performative. It is much more based on the idea of one individual, your loyalty and fealty to that individual, Donald Trump. You're no longer defined along the principles I just outlined, but you're basically defined as a Republican or a conservative if you align yourself with Trump and your fealty to Trump. That, for me, is not republicanism nor conservatism. That is something basically that has nothing to do with politics, but more have to do with sort of a cultish attitude. He makes you feel good. He's not doing much for you, but he makes you feel good. Well, when those principles no longer make you feel good, this is what it looks like. And when you figure you got more going with Putin and Orban and others than you have with Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush, you know there's a problem. And that's where we find ourselves today. So
are you a Republican?
Yes, I am. I'm still a card-carrying, hard-charging conservative because I know it pisses them off.
Sarah, what is your definition of Republican?
Michael's speaking. Michael and I are going to be on the same page on a bunch of stuff, and we're on the same page here. But I'll just say I can do it slightly shorter, which is that nothing about me has changed. I still believe in limited governments, free markets, and American leadership in the world, just as I always did. It was what drew me to conservatism in the first place. That definition for me, though, is no longer the definition for the party. Michael laid that out very clearly, and that's true. I think one of the things that I'm going to talk about a lot tonight, and I've talked about when I've been on, I've come on here before, is that, when I came up in the conservative movement, I worked professionally, both for conservative think tanks and then in sort of the conservative political and policy world. And when Trump came on the scene, I was genuinely shocked that the party would be drawn in by him. I thought it was incomprehensible. And once Trump got elected, one of the things I started doing was I immediately started to think about how can we primary this guy? And in thinking about that, I started doing a lot of audience research with Republican voters. And the second I started doing focus groups with Republican voters, I went, oh, okay. Mm-hmm. I spend a lot of time in think tanks and in Washington, D.C., where people talk about things like limited government, free markets, and American leadership in the world. And there's lots of policy panels and people talk, and books and authors and magazines. That is not the world that these voters were living in. They were angry. Trump's populist pitch animated them. The own the libs mentality, the sort of perpetual culture war was very animating. The fact that he had been on television and was this sort of carefully curated version of a businessman that they thought represented what a businessman was, even though I think a lot of us might look at him and say, it's not actually how like a good businessman operates in the world. To them, they saw him as somebody who's going to fight on their behalf. And they had a lot of grievances that he shared. But the principles that Michael's talking about are just things that that they do not animate the voters. They animate a section of sort of the intellectual element of the party. And that intellectual element, actually, when they realized they lost the voters a long time ago, they all moved to follow them, right? And to backfill for the most part. And I think that's why we find ourselves as kind of a remnant, because we were sort of like, actually, I always believed these things. And just because the voters don't, and now they want this sort of populist demagogue, like, I'm not going to follow him. And so, when you say like, am I still a conservative who believes in those principles? I am. Do I want any affiliation with this modern Republican Party? I absolutely do not. And so I find myself a bit of a renegade independent who thinks about the world differently now, not in terms of right, left, tribe, red, blue, but much more in, I actually think that there's a genuine threat to American democracy as we know it, liberal democracy as I conceive it. And so how do we continue to try to orient things in a more pro-democracy direction, sort of irrespective of political parties? But if the Republican Party is going to be a dangerous illiberal party, that may mean trying to elect Democrats, but it also may mean building a big, broad pro-democracy coalition that pulls the Democratic Party in a slightly more moderate direction. And so there's a lot of ways to think about how you improve democracy, but I think that's my frame nowadays.
But you could argue that you both are not remnants when you look at the results of the midterms, which was terrible for the Republican Party, based on this very idea that you just mentioned, January 6th. As well as the Dobbs decision. You look at 2020, Trump lost the Senate, lost Georgia twice. His supporters are it appears to be in the minority of the party, and yet he has this overwhelming approval rating when polled. So how do you answer that? How does that make sense?
I'll take the first shot at that. I really kind of building off of what Sarah laid out. This is in many respects is not surprising to Sarah's important point. I've been involved in grassroots politics from the very early part of my career. So we needed the Sarahs in those think tanks and in those rooms to help us sort of put the philosophy and the thinkings of the party on paper, and then we take that out on the street. We talk about it and we share it, right? So you had this sort of almost homogeneous effort to sort of galvanize the activists in the party around some core ideas. What happened was that broke. That began to break in the late 80s. It culminated in the contract with America, where for the first time, Newt Gingrich was able to, in a renegade sort of style, change the dynamics in the House. That spilt out on the streets. And that process of breaking that base vote, to Sarah's point, grew angrier, more frustrated, because the things they wanted weren't getting done, whether it was getting a Supreme Court that would actually overturn Roe versus Wade, whether it was cutting government spending, et cetera, cutting taxes, all of that. So you have this sort of building up, this ongoing building up inside the party. So when Trump comes along in his, made for TV, cavalier, I got you kind of style, it was an immediate gravitation. I saw it at the beginning of the Tea Party movement in 2009, when I first sat down with 50 Tea Partiers from around the country. They were angry as hell. They were frustrated. They were pissed off. They just turned out John McCain, said no to him. They wiped out Republicans in 2006. I know that personally because I was on the ballot in 2006. And I had Republican after Republican told me, I'd vote for you any other time, but not right now because I'm pissed at the party. So this strain was something that was always there. What Donald Trump was able to do was to take that anger and have it metastasize in a way that enabled him to come in and be the great savior. He would hold up pieces of paper and say, these judges, I'm going to put them on the bench and we're going to overturn Roe versus Wade. Guess what? He did that. That's why right now that base is locked in with him, because he's delivered the thing that the establishment had promised for damn near 35, 40 years and never delivered on. Not just on Roe, but
Michael,
a whole bunch
you were
of things.
part of that establishment. So what did
Yes.
you do wrong?
Pardon me?
You're part of that establishment. What did you do wrong?
I didn't do anything wrong. I won. You remember 2010? I understood that base well enough to go out and talk to them without having to play to their fears, their anger. I didn't have to go after Nancy Pelosi and you know, throw fire bombs and bromides at her personally. I talked about policy, you know.
But you are no longer leading the party. You're no longer leading the party, and
Yeah.
party is basic, or the RNC is now Trump's RNC.
Yeah, and so and they're not talking about policy. They spent 8 years talking about repealing, replacing Obamacare without any replacement. So that's the problem. At a certain point, as I remember having meetings with the leadership on Obamacare, I said at a certain point, you know, if we win on this, we're going to have to use the 14 doctors in the House Republican caucus and put out a piece of legislation that replaces Obamacare. Not to mention the fact that Obamacare was really the heritage program from the 1990s, but we'll set that aside. The reality of it is, what became more important was not delivering on the policy, but alleviating the anger, to giving it some place to go, without any thought that, okay, at some point there's still that expectation that something is going to get done. And when you don't do that, that frustration begins to take hold, and you see it play out the way it has, which to this day, everyone running around talking about Donald Trump and surprised that, you know, he's still where he is. It's not surprising to me. It's not surprising to Sarah. Because we spend time talking to these folks and they're telling, I'm not going anywhere. This man is good for me. He's doing what I want him to do. And I want him back in the White House. And the party has not reconciled itself with that truth, that reality yet. And they're whistling past that.
When are they going to do that? I mean, it's been
Sarah.
Well, there's going to be a Republican primary. But I guess let me try to. So to answer your question about 22, right? I think all of us are pretty happy about the way that 22 turned out, because our expectations were in a darker place. Fundamentals were against us. A lot of really scary people on these ballots. You know, I spent a ton of money in 22. We were the biggest outside spender against Kari Lake, who I viewed as one of the most dangerous people. You know, a lot of these people were going to be in positions to oversee elections. And because, as you note, both the Dobbs decision and then Trump's endorsing these candidates and the base choosing very Trumpy candidates who were also running on campaigns of election denialism, you ended up with Blake Masters and Herschel Walker and Kari Lake and these kind of mini Trumpers, right? And what happened was a bunch of swing voters and right-leaning independents, moderate Republicans, looked at the total, both their positions on abortion and also their positions on election denialism, and just also like people, I would do focus groups, and you know, people would say in Arizona especially, they'd be like, I really want to vote for a Republican. I don't want to vote for Mark Kelly, but I'm not voting for Blake Masters. He likes the Unabomber and he's a lunatic. Right? Like they wanted to vote for Republicans, but they did not want to vote for these Republicans because these same voters rejected Trump, and then they rejected a bunch of Trumpy candidates. So the Republican Party right now is in like a little bit of a weird mode where there's this section of the party that sees Trump as unelectable going forward. He's not winning for them. They think he did a good job. They're not rejecting him. They're not breaking with him. They're not saying that Make America Great Again and America First is a bad way to orient themselves. They actually like that. They want someone who can win. And this is where you get the Ron DeSantis version of the Republican Party. And I think what's important to understand is there's a lot of people that I think are broadly favorable or much more acceptable who will get into this race, or even Nikki Haley's already in this race. That is not what the Republican Party wants. Like, no. There are two major camps, and one is the always Trumpers who, even after seeing January 6th and after seeing everything that Trump has done and the way that he has done nothing but be aggrieved over 2020 for the last couple of years, there's a section of that party, maybe 28, 30%. They're sticking with him, right? That's his floor. No one's going anywhere. He's got that floor. That's huge. That's 30% that's never going with him. Then there's this other camp of like maybe Trumpers who still like him, aren't breaking with him, but see Ron DeSantis as more electable and also presenting maybe a slightly more respectable version of the grievance-based politics. You know, he's going to talk about culture wars. Again, little light on policy. Michael's point should be very well taken. This is not I joined the party that I thought was a party of policy, right? A smart party that wanted to talk about ideas. It is all culture war all the time right now. And Ron DeSantis is setting the tone for a whole category of people. Like even Nikki Haley getting in this race, she's not trying to run Donald Trump style. She's trying to run DeSantis style. You know, DeSantis isn't going far enough with his don't say gay bill. I think it should be 5th grade. He only said 3rd grade. And you're going to see a lot of people get in kind of in that DeSantis lane. And I do a lot of focus groups with people who DeSantis is the only alternative. And they say something very specific that I think should orient you toward how people think about the party. They say Ron DeSantis is Trump without the baggage. He's Trump not on steroids. Trump is their worldview. Trump is their center, and other people are versions of Trump, right? And so Ron DeSantis is a more polished, more electable version of Trump in their minds. That's not a huge deviation from where we've been. Now, I will argue with anybody till my last breath that Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump are different and they represent different threats. I think Donald Trump is different. I think if you do a thought exercise of what a second term of Donald Trump would be versus a first term of anybody else, I promise you will go to an extremely dark place very quickly in which Don Jr. is the Secretary of State and we're in just an insane place. And so I don't buy this idea that Ron DeSantis is more dangerous than Donald Trump. However, the idea that he's not so different and that the party basically wants a version of Trump, but just not so alienating to swing voters is a pretty good understanding of where the party is right now.
And if I could just real quick on that, and I'm one of those who think DeSantis is more dangerous than Donald Trump, because I know what I get with Donald Trump. I know I go to a dark place with him, and I know it's going to be, you know, the first 2 years is all about revenge and payback and get all that done, all of that. DeSantis, what I find dangerous about a DeSantis is how you get sucked in, how you get sucked into narratives and storylines that allow for people to burn books and to decide you can't read X and you can't do Y. And how he makes people feel better about their racism, how he makes them feel better about their anti-LGBTQ, how he makes them feel better about, well, I'm defending my child against trans this and trans that, right? Where the bottom line is the same level of hate, racism, and ugliness. It's just dressed differently. It sounds better. And you feel a lot better about yourself. Your guilt factor goes down by a factor of 100 with DeSantis. Whereas Trump, you're like, oh, I don't know if I can tell people that I really like Trump because they may think I'm this. With DeSantis, I'm all about DeSantis. And I'm like, really? So you want to come to my neighborhood and start talking about what you really think about Black people? So this is the conversation that nobody in the party wants to have. Everybody's flocking to DeSantis because it makes them feel better about the things they know they feel bad about. But
so can I just say this is an important, this is like a debate that's happening right now, sort of among, I think, not just never Trumpers, but the Republican Party in general. It's a good one because I think that because the thing is, I mostly agree with Michael in the sense that both Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis are versions of an illiberal president, right? Like it's just that Trump is like the Aristotelian version. He's Trump, the man, the whole thing, right? There's
gold toilets.
A whole thing is manifested off of Trump. Like he's unleashed a whole force on the party. DeSantis is more like Orbanism, right? It's like, we're going to be a liberal. We're going to define our enemies against minority groups. And that's going to allow us to cleave together with our sort of our tribe. And yeah, we're going to ban books. And most importantly, this is like actually the thing about DeSantis that I think is his distinction, is that DeSantis understands and sees the utility, not of saying let's limit government, but let's use the power of government. Let's unleash it against our enemies. Like, let's use the force of government against our enemies, which to Michael's point is very dangerous. Like, it's not Trump DeSantis. It's sort of like, do you want, like, but imagine what it says about our country if Donald Trump, having fomented an insurrection, having refused to engage in the peaceful transition of power. Imagine if we reelect him. Like, imagine what that says about us. It says something different about us, knowing what we're getting, than it says if people take a flyer on DeSantis because he's 48 years old and Joe Biden's very old and he understands how to pivot more to the center in a general election. And so I understand those arguments. I just think as a practical matter in terms of what would happen, that Donald Trump is more dangerous. But I also understand that there's a reason to debate it. Because it's not like I think that DeSantis, this is my whole point was that I don't think DeSantis reflects a positive turn for the party. Like, there's right. Moving on from Trump to something that looks like a normal Republican Party. And then there's moving on from Trump to DeSantis, which is like, how much are we moving on?
Yeah, but I think the question is, and Michael, you raise it, and Sarah as well, is the undergirding of all this is this culture war obsession. And so, as you say, the anti-LGBTQ, the banning books, the critical race theory, demonizing all of it as code for, racist beliefs, and et cetera, et cetera. And it works. Obviously, DeSantis won by double digits in the last election. And so how do you break that fever and get back to the Republicanism that you two are attracted to?
You break the fever by
electoral defeats.
That's it. You break the fever.
But look at DeSantis, how popular he is in Florida.
Yeah, he's popular in Florida, but he's not going to, trust me on this, he's not going to translate outside of Florida. He's not going to translate. In my view, he does not translate because he has a glass jaw. And this is the thing about him that nobody really wants to pay attention to. If you want to get a beat on what you're going to see on a national stage, go back and watch the debate between him and Governor Christ in this last election cycle. And it is the most, as a former county chairman and state chairman and candidate, it is the most telling thing about him in the world to watch how he responds and reacts to adversity. That was Governor Christ, not Donald Trump on that stage.
I say I didn't know, Michael, I say this all the time too. The Christ debate is so telling about DeSantis. And especially there's a moment in the Christ debate where Christ accuses DeSantis. He's like, you're not even going to stay governor. You're going to run for president. And Ron DeSantis just smiles weirdly and like doesn't answer him. And then is like, let's move on to the next question. And he's so uncomfortable. Every politician who's ever wanted to run for president has had to answer the question about, are you going to be in this job? Or are you going to run for president? Everybody knows how to answer it. It's like, well, I'm very devoted to being the governor of Florida. And I'm not even thinking about running for, it's like not that hard to answer, but he like did like a weird awkward smile. And this is this point about, the party's going to have this fight, and the fight is going to be over like not super large differences between Trump and DeSantis, but the hype around DeSantis now, like he's in this race, whether he wants to be or not. Trump really hates him. Trump thinks he's going to be able to paint him as a rhino globalist, establishment type. And I think some of that could land. But the biggest thing Trump thinks, and I think some of the other governors think this too, and it's kind of out there in the water in Republican circles, is that DeSantis just isn't that good. And so when people think that, so he's got all this hype. So when he comes on the stage, he's either going to meet that hype and be able to build his coalition and chip away at Trump's, or it's going to deflate because people are like, this is not the guy I thought I was getting. I thought I was going to get this fighter and he was going to be really great. But Trump's making mincemeat out of him, embarrassing him, little Marcoing him, lion Tedding him. And then what happens, and this is the really important part, and it tells you everything you need to know about the party. What happens when Ron DeSantis, let's say Ron DeSantis implodes, it doesn't have it. He doesn't have the thing. Do people go to Nikki Haley? Do they go to Tim Scott? Do they go to Mike Pence? Do they go to Mike Pompeo? Or do they go back to Trump? And I think that answer is very obvious, which is those people backslide to Trump. They don't say, I think Nikki Haley would be great.
Yep. Because if they thought
So-
Nikki Haley was great, they would attach to Nikki Haley in the first place, because on that stage, she's much more of a proven player, you know, given her role as governor and UN and Trump administration. They know her. I'm talking nationally, not necessarily in, you know, South Carolina or Florida. So DeSantis has to build that up, to Sarah's excellent point. He's got to show he's got the chops, the moxie to kind of do his thing. And to not only, and I've been saying this since Nikki got into this race, and I'll say it with every candidate after her to get into this, if you're not prepared to go mano a mano with Trump and take him down and show him up and call him out and not fear that base, which at the end of the day, if they're all about winning, yeah, you're not going to get the hardcore, but you're going to get some folks to slide with you anyway. You might as well stay home, sit down. Because you're not ready to do this. You're just not ready to do this, in my view. Donald Trump is a particular type of candidate. And if you've not had to face that type of candidate, as we saw in 2016, you won't know to do on a stage when he turns to you and unleashes and says your wife is ugly or your husband is, you know, incompetent. What do you do? If you're not prepared for that moment, stay home.
I guess we got a little taste of that when he floated this idea that DeSantis may have been a groomer when he was a high school teacher for a year. And so, Sarah, what do you think how is he going to attack DeSantis? But it's the sanctimonious. It doesn't really work that much. I don't know. It's kind of fell flat, but
I don't like the sanctimonious because it was
there's
original.
a lot of syllables happening. So how do you think he's going to try to take down DeSantis?
Yeah. So first of all, when you are around DeSantis and you've been calling everybody a groomer for years, and then suddenly a picture surfaces of you drinking with teenagers and Donald Trump, you are accused of being a groomer. That's a groomerang. That's what that is. That's when the groomer thing spins around and comes back and hits you in the face.
Did you coin that?
I did coin it, but not tonight. I thought of it as a different thing, but now I'm using it because I think it's funny. But look, the way he's going to attack DeSantis. So this is the thing that I think caught the candidates off guard in 2016, and that DeSantis thinks he knows how to handle, but probably doesn't in reality, which is the extent to which Trump will go low in the most despicable and egregious ways. These guys can't fathom it because no other human's done it to them before. But like Ron DeSantis, is not big on consultants, doesn't have a lot of people in his orbit, a lot of people he trusts, really trusts his wife, right? She's the main person that he takes, like that is like his main sounding board or whatever. What happens? She had cancer recently. What happens when Donald Trump starts attacking his wife in the lowest of ways? Can Ron DeSantis, and it's sort of like, you know, Marco Rubio struggled with this. You remember in 2016 when Trump started doing this, at first they like ignored him and they just attacked each other. And then eventually like they tried to get their hands dirty and they kind of tried to give it back to him. Like Marco Rubio did this to just like the most atrocious, like it just didn't work at all, right? They embarrassed themselves sinking to Trump's level. It is harder to do than you think to get into the mud with a person like that. And I think that Trump's going to do two things. I think he's going to attack him in the lowest, most degrading forms and try to bait him because he thinks Ron DeSantis does have a glass jaw, isn't good on his feet, and will betray how cantankerous and sort of everybody who like knows Ron DeSantis just says he doesn't have any charisma and he's prickly. He's like a prickly guy.
He's prickly.
Trump. So I always struggle with this because I think Trump is repellent, but there are a lot of people who think Trump has a ton of charisma and that he's got like a kind of a happy warrior and he would both be funny as well as racist and, vile. But he had this way of sort of charming people and being charismatic that Ron DeSantis doesn't have. And I think that big bombast, one of my big questions is like, does Trump still have his fastball in this regard? But so some of it, we haven't seen him as much in the last few years. Everybody's getting older these days. You may have noticed, and Trump as well. But I do think he is going to attack DeSantis is a phony. I think he's going to say, I made this guy. And you know what? There's a lot of really good evidence around that. Ron DeSantis's launch ad, nobody's Googled it. Or if you haven't watched it, you should.
Is that the Lego, the building the wall?
Ron DeSantis is with his daughter saying, build
yeah.
the wall. And they're building it with blocks. He is reading the art of the deal to his son, who is a baby son, infant son, who is in a Trump onesie. Like, it is so over the top. I am Trump's guy, that the ability for Trump to be like, I own you, man, I made you, is real. And so, you know, right now.
But let me ask you this, though, that it seems that the money is now moving towards DeSantis. He has $100 million. He has some very wealthy. Yeah. Okay. And he also has Jeb too, by the way, which I guess he doesn't want to trumpet that loudly.
Yeah, but Jeb is denying any endorsement.
Yeah, because DeSantis called him and said, you can endorse me in September of 2024, but right now it's not helping me, bro.
Right.
Because this is how Trump's going to attack him. He's going to say, this guy is just like every other establishment. Because this is what people love about Trump. They say he's not a politician. They don't trust politicians. They don't like politicians. And so if Ron DeSantis is a politician, even people like him because he's a fighter, Trump can kind of be like, you're just like all of them. You're phony. That's going to stick with some people.
But this is also the base, right? And so what about all of the rest of the party who is convertible and maybe, as Michael was saying, finds DeSantis more appealing? The suburban Republican moms who find Trump loathsome. Is there enough there to put DeSantis?
Don't find Trump loathsome.
Who do find Trump loathsome?
No, they don't. This is really important.
They don't. No,
this is really important.
They don't.
People who voted for Trump twice and who are moving on to DeSantis, there's a real chunk of the party that's doing that, who says, I don't think Trump's electable. I think we need to move on. He's too old. He's alienated too many people. Even if they say they kind of don't like his attitude or they do not hate him. They do not find him repellent the way that I do. They voted for him twice. They think he did a good job. They think they've moved the party in the right direction. These swing voters, the suburban moms we were able to pry away from the Republican Party to vote for Joe Biden, they do. But the people who voted for Trump twice, even ones who have hesitations about him, still think he did a pretty good job. They don't hate him.
But those people, then, the swing voters that you pried away, is that a big enough block then to keep DeSantis in the running should he falter in a debate with Trump?
The problem is that's not the primary makeup of a Republican primary. That swing voter is not driving elections, because if they were, Marjorie Taylor Greene wouldn't be in Congress. Lauren Boebert would not have won her reelection. She would have lost by 1,000 as opposed to winning by 500 votes. So, you need to fundamentally understand, and then let's go back tactically to something I, would work with candidates who were in these types of races to help them understand. You're going to lose your primary, right? Unless you understand this, that only 20% of the entire Republican base is going to come out and vote in your primary. 20% of, let's just round a number, 1,000 voters, 20% are going to come out and vote. Those 200 people are going to decide exactly who the nominee is going to be. You're leaving all those other folks to just kind of like, well, I don't like to vote in primaries, or I only vote in general elections, or I'm just not feeling the vibe. You've got to get in front of those voters. You've got to move a percentage of those voters who ordinarily would not play in a primary to play in a primary. The narrative, the conventional wisdom narrative, is that no other Republican can come in, a Larry Hogan, a Governor Sununu. They have no chance. They do have a chance. There are 50 states and 7 territories worth of chances for them to cleave out a lane that makes this a competitive race, provided, however, the RNC doesn't put their finger on the scale, as they have done in prior elections, to favor Donald Trump or to favor even Ron DeSantis. So how these candidates approach this election will tell you a lot about how they see their chances of winning. Because if they come in with the conventional layout and they're going to think they're going to go in here and they're just going to woo Sarah's focus group, good luck with that. It's not happening. They're not moving. And no matter how much you throw up in front of them, in fact, the more you throw up in front of them how bad Trump is, or how much Trump is not this or that, or the more you will lose them. So that's not your target. Your target is not that 20, 25%, even 30% that show up. Your target is the rest that stay home in those primaries, in South Carolina, in California, in New York, in West Virginia, in Maryland, in places where that Trump base is probably not as big as the rest of the electorate, and you can make a difference.
So fast forward to the general, and let's say you don't make a difference and Trump is the nominee. How does he do against Biden, assuming Biden is the nominee?
Sarah?
I'll answer that, but first I just want to say, I'm not saying Ron DeSantis can't win a Republican primary or,
Right.
or that anybody else can't. Ron DeSantis can. I just think his ability to perform is a deep unknown. And until we see it, I think it's really hard to game out. And I think Trump and who he is now and how he performs, those are both these kind of unknowns that are outstanding. And I'm always a big believer, not only that lots of different things can happen, but that you can have an impact on what happens by doing the work. I mean, to Michael's point, Will Hurd used to say this all the time in his district in Texas, which was you know, he was a Republican, but in a Hillary Clinton plot, you know, a Clinton plus 4 or 5 district. And he was like, but the way that he would win is he would say, you got to change the makeup of the electorate.
That's
right. You have to get different people out. And so I think that's true. I think the question is whether or not anybody can get in spitting distance, like to really make a run at it. I think DeSantis is in the best position, but the question is whether he lives up to the hype. And I just think that's an unknown right now. Sorry. Now I'll answer your question about the general. Here's the thing. And it's the reason that I think if I could make one recommendation to everybody about the way that they should be thinking about 2024, it's to do everything they can to get Trump out of this primary early. There are ways to chip away at Trump's support. And I think a lot of people are going to sit it out and just observe, especially people who really care about democracy. And that's a mistake. Like I right now am thinking all the time about how do you beat Trump in this primary? I hate DeSantis. I don't want DeSantis to be the nominee. But like Donald Trump is, to me, as I said earlier, I think he represents a very unique and specific catastrophic event in our country, and that we should do everything we can to keep him from being the nominee. If he is the nominee, part of the reason that is a huge problem is that he's going to run against Biden and they're both old. And you think about it like, well, Trump head to head to Biden beat him before, like Biden can beat Trump again. Trump's not going to run against Biden, and neither is DeSantis. They're going to run against Kamala Harris because Joe Biden is old and voters know he's old and they're concerned about the fact that he's old and they think that he could get sick or he could die in office. And they are going to make sure that they are running against the more unpopular of the two, which is Kamala Harris. And in the focus groups, not only so I was just doing a focus group the other night, and it was with swing voters, people who voted for Trump in 16, Biden in 20. And they'd all watch the State of the Union. We screened for people who'd watch the State of the Union because we were asking them what they thought. And, you know, they were pretty pro Biden. And I imagine if you wanted to sit through the State of the Union, maybe that means that you're a little bit more pro Biden or into him, whatever. We said, they thought the State of the Union was great. They thought he knocked it out of the park. Still weren't sure he should run again. They still thought he was too old. But when we said, hey, Biden versus Trump, who do you go for? Biden. Biden versus DeSantis, who do you go for? Biden. Kamala versus Trump. And everybody went like this. And took a long pause. And eventually they all kind of like worked there. But I mean, I think that I just think that's the strategy in the general. And one of the main reasons people should want Trump out as early as possible is you want Trump out being really mad that DeSantis is the nominee, because Donald Trump doesn't care about the Republican Party, and he'll spend all his time yelling at DeSantis and sidelining his people. And that is going to be helpful in terms of this like split in the party. I just think like if you're just thinking strategically about the election, but I think the way the Republicans are thinking strategically is forget Biden. We're running against Kamala, because he's going to be 86 at the end of his second term. You're going to hear the number 86 closer to 90 over and over and over again.
And
So,
that,
go
no,
ahead.
I was just going to say I could not agree with that more. The other thing I would add on top of that is, I'm sorry, I just don't trust the white female vote. Trump has owned it in the last 2 election cycles. I don't care how you break it down. White suburban women like it, and it's hard when you stop and think about you know, how these votes align themselves and how people actually walk into these elections. It's not a red blue narrative for them. If in a lot of instances, to a lot of what the work that Sarah does and the conversations I know I have with folks, you'll be surprised at the voter who votes for Trump. You know, a lot of people think it's this, you know, oh, this right-wing conservative. No, it's not. It's not. He got 7 million more votes than he did the first time. Where the hell do you think that came from? There aren't that many Republicans in the country that's going to give you that kind of number. So the reality of it is Trump has advantages going into a head-to-head with Biden, not just Kamala, not just age, but just the underlying voter who likes him for a lot of the reasons that Sarah's already laid out. And I think, to her excellent point, getting Trump out early changes the landscape. And it actually, ironically, frees voters up to look critically and think critically about the candidates in front of them, whether it's DeSantis or Chris Christie or Joe Biden, or even Kamala Harris as a potential alternative should Biden not be there. It changes the way people look at these elections. And I think that's a good, healthy thing for the country. But I think her warning is certainly something you should keep right here.
Interesting. Okay, so let's get to a couple of questions. And one of them actually goes to your point, Michael. Here's one way to get Trump out. Phil asks, what about all these investigations? Any chance they may bear fruit and he won't be able to run for office?
I think even if they bore fruit, what's to stop him from running? He's not a convicted felon. And he'll use
if
that.
He's indicted, does that affect him at all?
Indictments, as far as I know, indictments don't prevent you from getting on a ballot. We've had candidates sitting in jail and got reelected, awaiting trial. So
but does that do anything for his supporters? Does it energize them? Does it make them?
Oh, it energizes them. Yeah. You think using the term witch hunt was overused over the last 4 years. Wait till you get into this environment. But it does, I think, it has the potential, and it'll be interesting to see how it changes some of the dynamics inside the Republican primary, because that will be the first gauntlet he has to get through, and how those Republican voters, going back to my earlier point, how more and more decide to inject themselves in a primary election who otherwise would not, for the purposes of getting a nominee that actually would not have that baggage and could be in a better position to defeat Joe Biden in the fall.
So if Kamala is the problem, what does the White House do? It's not going to dump her as on the ticket. So is there going to be a big rehabilitation in the next year or so of Kamala Harris?
I bet there will be.
And it has to start with Democrats shutting their mouths up about it, because a lot, as I told some folks recently, Democrats, real quick, hey, your problem isn't us. Republicans haven't keyed in on Kamala. You guys are the ones who created this narrative around her, right? We may say something about her and the border, and then you guys take the ball and run with it for 2 weeks. So yeah, I think it starts with how the Democrats decide to fix that problem. But Sarah, you probably have a better beat on that.
No, I mean, I think that the sooner that Biden, so a couple of things have to happen. So one, Biden's got to announce that he's running, because the longer that you can speculate about whether he's not, then people think like, well, maybe he won't do it. And if we apply this pressure, this narrative pressure, we'll be explaining that, hey, you're too old and actually maybe you should step down. That's not going to happen. And so the sooner he announces it and like people are like, okay, he's running, need to be on board. And also it's not just rehabilitating her. I think a big part of the problem for Kamala, like, let's just leave aside her political acumen, but a lot of it is like, Biden's not seen with her. There's no sense that they're a team. There's no sense that she's part of his team. And I think they're going to have to look at each other and be like, it's us again. Here we are. Here we go. We're in the boat together. Being a team is going to be really important. Projecting our unity to the country, him giving her the ability to shine in places where right now, they want Biden to shine in a lot of things. And the whole point of a VP is don't upstage the big guy, and like that dynamic, but they're going to have to figure out how to find spaces for her where she can win, where they elevate each other. And that's going to be like a big strategic task for them over the next couple of years, because the benefit of incumbency is that you don't have to fight the messy ideological wars and like be combative. That's their big leg up. And so they should lean into that by being like, look how unified we are, look how ready we are to move forward, and let people get to know her in a way that hopefully, benefits people's perceptions of her.
You could argue though that they're not selling his achievements. So how are they going to sell her achievements? I mean, he's achieved a remarkable amount of legislative wins in the last couple of years. A $2 trillion COVID relief package, the Infrastructure Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, all of these were passed in his administration. And I would wager most voters have no idea what they entail, what's in them, if that's going to affect them, and any of his legislative accomplishments.
I think part of that goes to the fact that I'm sorry, Democrats just don't know how to do political communication. They don't do the politics of communication. They get all emotional about stuff and they just kind of wring their hands over stuff. Meanwhile, Republicans have got, okay, we got to get this on a bumper sticker. We need folks to know with clarity where we're going with something, what the messaging is. But having said that, I think one of the advantages that is going to be an ironic surprise for an opportunity for the administration is all the things that they did, particularly on the infrastructure stuff. Guess what? That comes online this summer and fall. It comes online because once you pass the legislation, you got to operationalize it. That means you got to actually get it into the departments that then push it out into the states, and then the states get it on the ground. And so there's going to be a whole lot of ribbon cuttings and bridges being blown up for new ones to replace them and roads being constructed. All of that infrastructure stuff is going to start happening just as this presidential campaign kicks off. So the Biden administration will have the opportunity to then show up in places, and Kamala's going to be a big part of that, and say, this bridge that you were afraid to cross is being replaced because we were here, because of what Joe Biden and Kamala Harris did, right? So they'll have these opportunities to tell that story. But to the bigger point, you got to set the story up first. And that was the failing of the last year. And they sort of regrouped themselves just in time for the general elections of 22. But going into that cycle, they were losing that narrative because the voters were like, what the hell have you done? And as we saw, and Sarah can tell you this, there was polling just coming off the heels of that, where 62% of the American people don't believe the man's done anything. And that was just a few weeks ago. So there's some communication gaps they're going to have to close if they're hoping to begin to catch up narratively to where Republicans, to Sarah's earlier points about how Republicans are going to talk about his age and all of that, to catch up narratively to what's going to be coming at them.
Sarah, is there any in any world does Biden get primaried?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the benefit of incumbency is real. Like, there's a reason there's a real catch-22 for Biden, both on the Kamala question and on the Biden question himself. Like, the way that it would have to work is that Biden would have to decide now that he was stepping back. He would have to do it really early because he'd have to give the field time. And she would be an early front runner probably. And I think, like the last time, she would fade in favor potentially of somebody else. I think the thing that's interesting to me about the Democrats is how coming out of 22, they actually have a great bench for 2028. Whitmer, Warnock, Buttigieg, Shapiro. They've just been, there's a bunch of people that are sort of up and coming stars, some people who won some tough elections, and some people who won really Whitmer just like crushed in a swing state. That's really important. The problem is nobody's quite ready for 24. And so I think there's this great SNL skit in which people are sitting around being like, man, Biden, he's so old, he can't run again. And then they just start going through the alternatives and they say like, Hillary, it's like a horror movie, right? As they consider all the different alternatives at the end, they're like, I guess it's Biden. Like, I guess we do that again. And that is, I think that has been the thought exercise. And, I checked out the questions in the chat, and there's one that keeps coming up, which is, Biden's age is such a problem. Why isn't Trump's? And this is an interesting one because Trump's age does come up among Republican voters. Like there is like we need generational change. They like DeSantis because he's younger. They do think Trump is older. Part of the problem is, so Trump's a little younger than Biden. I think it's 4 years. Trump, though, he's showing his age, but he's still as a communicator. His unbelievable ability is because he's so shameless, right? That before any legislation had gotten passed under the Trump administration, he would go around and he would get everybody else to do it too. He'd be like, best economy for women, best economy for Black people. We moved the thing to Israel. We did this and we did this. And he only has like 12 brain cells, but he uses them to say the same things over and over and over and over again. And it is and then all of the other people would be like, yeah, we did that. We did that. We did that. And all of his people they would create this echo chamber. Democrats both don't do that. And also I think Biden's age and maybe the fact that he was not a particularly like that kind of communication isn't his strong suit to begin with. Like they really level into, he's going to give this speech at the State of the Union. We're going to make sure he gets a B12 shot. He's going to go in there. He's going to knock it out of the park. We're going to prep him for the fact that Republicans are going to heckle him. We're going to use that to bait them. We're going to win. Really, really good. He can't do that day after day. Trump is driven by ego and mania and the desire to get up in front of people and tell people how great he is. And that leads him to just be a different kind of communicator that demonstrates a different level of stamina, that people read it differently, even though they are concerned about his age. It's not completely different, but I think people ask me that a lot, and there is a difference in the way people perceive them. Mm-hmm. What did you ask? I started like stop asking your question, answering your question. I'm sorry.
I don't remember, but whatever you said, yes. So it was the primary question. I think that was the original question. But I guess, his approval ratings, have they cracked 50% Biden's approval ratings? I don't know if they have in his tenure. No. And so I guess how are Democrats feeling about that they have this deeply unpopular president? They're not there's nowhere else to go, really. What are they going to do in this election? Are they going to, just hold their nose and rally at least vote for Biden, not necessarily enthusiastically, or will they sit it out? And is that a worry with the Democratic Party?
Well, just real quick for me, they better hold their nose, cover their eyes, and do whatever the hell else they need to do, because the alternative is not pleasant. I mean, I said this going into the 22 cycle. Don't sucker yourself into believing that this party is going to be better and do better because it sounds different, right? We watched 15 rounds of Kevin McCarthy trying to become speaker. And I remember telling folks beforehand that it's going to be very hard for Kevin to become speaker. Kevin's going to have to make a lot of promises to become speaker. Kevin's going to do a lot of stuff you're not going to like to become speaker. So why give him that opportunity to become speaker? If you elect the party that fomented insurrection, what the hell do you think you're going to get on the other side, right? And here we are. 44,000 clips from video clips from January 6th in the hands of not every reporter in the country, just one who's not even a reporter, Fox News. And what's the response? Well, you had an exclusive before, so we're going to let him have an exclusive and then we'll release it. You think that's something? It's nothing compared to what a Republican-controlled House, a Republican Senate, and these Republicans in the White House are going to do. So you can sit there all you want to and be plaintive about Joe Biden and be plaintive about, this, that, or the other thing, because, you didn't get this progressive moment, or you didn't get that, center left moment, or you didn't get this as a Democrat. At some point, you realize the other side is not going to play the way you think they are if you give them the power, because they demonstrate time after time they don't. And the beauty of it is they're going to tell you up front. They'll tell you up front, this is what we're going to do. And then you get a chance to vote for it or against it. And in 22, they voted for it. And here we are. Marjorie Taylor Greene is the Speaker of the House.
Okay, we have reached the end of our allotted time. So I wanted to give you both just a chance to sum up in a few short sentences. If you want any final words, Sarah?
So I'll use my summation to kind of answer your question, which is, I don't think that Joe Biden is deeply unpopular. And I think the way that I think people aren't enthusiastic about Biden, but I think that he is hoping for a matchup that worked in the past, which is a kind of competence versus crazy. And to Michael's point, everything we've talked about here, Republicans are going to give them a lot of crazy to work with. And I think that, I still think anything can happen. I would like Trump not to be the nominee. I think that's rolling dice in a really big way. But I do think Joe Biden can win, even with the liabilities I've expressed, in large part because the Republican Party, the main fundamental problem for the party these days is that Trump controls the base. The base is quite large. And what the base wants, the gap between what the base wants and what swing voters will tolerate, has gotten very large. And that's the struggle that they have. They're having trouble navigating that gap.
No, that's an excellent point. And I think to that point about the swing voter, where I put all my cookies and my trust and my hope in this and subsequent elections, because we're not going to be out of the woods just as once you get through 24, just as we weren't out coming through 22, is that the three most powerful words that our founders put on paper, we the people, vests in us the ultimate say, vests in us the power to move this government and to move the men and women who represent us. We do not abdicate our responsibility as citizens just because I give you the title of senator, president, governor, or commissioner. We still have to engage. And my trust and my faith is that the American people, as they showed us in 22, as they showed us in 20, will say, to Sarah's point, I can't do crazy. I may not like everything over here. I may not agree with everything over there, but I can't do crazy because this country still matters to me. And it will matter to my kids and their kids. And that is where I think the sweet spot is for those of us who believe in democracy and those of us who work like Sarah and myself in trying to sustain and strengthen that democracy, regardless of party.
Well, it has just been a great hour. It just flew by. More than an hour flew by. I want to thank you both so much for joining us again. It was such a pleasure, Sarah and Michael.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks very much. Appreciate it.
Great to have you. And definitely everyone tune in again next week. Race, Crime, and Police Reform, What's Happening is the title of the topic, with Connie Rice and Bill Bratton, moderated by my colleague, Warren Alney. I'm Madeleine Brand. Thanks for joining us, and I'll see you later in the month. Bye-bye.